Hello, my lovely friends. I'm coming at you today from a different angle on the floor because after rewatching the podcast from last month, I realised that I do spend most of my time sat in the dark. So, still sussing that out. Hopefully, this is better and you can actually see me for a change. And I can also see what I'm doing rather than sitting in a dark corner in the back of my bedroom. Anyway, I've got a mega update. It's going to be quite a hefty podcast this week because this is kind of the summary of everything that I've worked on over the summer, which it turns out is quite a few things. Even though I was sort of demoralised because I felt like I'd really lost my mojo with craft over the last couple of weeks. I've had a very busy time since June and relocated, moved house twice, and started a new job. And so all of that combined with, still having holidays and doing all of my summer socializing didn't really leave a lot of time left. And so I felt like there were no projects that I was really excited to get my teeth into. But I feel like that's not an uncommon thing for summer knitting because it's just not the season for it. So I'm going to see what I can get through today and give my thoughts and opinions on some of the patterns that I've had a look at this summer, and also quite a few new whips for the autumn, which is very exciting, and some new kind of spontaneous finished objects that I just took a notion to start and seemed to whiz through at breakneck speed. So this is going to be a very classic podcast episode. I'm going to quickly run through my finished objects and then onto whips. And I don't have any acquisitions this month, but that's also a blessing because I don't need more yarn, and I kind of have yarn for all of the projects that are coming up soon, or that I'm planning to start soon. And I'm also focusing on destashing a little bit before the winter because I know that I'm going to acquire a lot more scraps as I finish some bigger projects. So a couple of the things I've worked on have been sort of really small, scrappy destashing projects. Destashing? My God. And it's kind of nice just to get those off my chest. And also, they've turned into some kind of nice things that I'm excited to wear. So it's a win-win. So the first project that I finished this summer, and kind of, I hate to say it, the only summer project which I finished this summer, is my self-drafted stripy skirt, which is ever so exciting. I realise you might not get a very good picture of it in this shot. Um, I don't think I've taken any photos with this yet, but they should be up on my Ravelry whenever I get round to it, which will hopefully be very soon. And this was knit with two colours of Rico's Essential Cottons DK, which is a great summer yarn and something that I'll definitely go back to because I really enjoyed the texture and working with it. The one thing I do say, and I also think that this is a cotton problem generally, is I find that it stretches out really, really quickly after kind of just one or two wears. And I don't know if anyone has any tips for getting elasticity back into cotton garments that's not just washing them. Because I feel like, especially for something like a skirt, I know everyone has really different opinions on this, and this is where I open up myself to loads of criticism. Because for some reason, everyone online has a tendency to be quite competitive about hygiene and clothes washing. But personally, I don't wash skirts very often because I find that they don't need to be washed unless I spill something on them, which is not infrequent, or, some other disaster. But I have found that because this stretches out so much, it's kind of been needing to be washed after every two or three wears just to get it back into the right shape. And I'm conscious that it really takes a toll on the fabric and it ends up not looking as great, and sometimes the colours can fade. And I haven't really noticed that yet, but I also feel like it would be a shame for that to happen. So I'd love to hear if anyone's got anything similar. Then maybe you have a great technique for getting it back into shape that I can use for this. Because it does have an elasticated waistband. It has a 1 inch width elastic just through the waistband, which is great for keeping that together. But I do find it's especially around the length and because it is quite a fitted or sort of A-line shape, whenever you're walking and moving around and sitting down, it just does stretch out in unusual places and looks not massively flattering. So any tips that people have would be great. I also didn't follow a pattern for this. I probably could have done. I'm sure there are a lot of really basic skirt patterns which do this job, but I kind of just thought it was a bit of an experiment and it turned out quite well, I think. I basically calculated the gauge that I needed for the waistband and did a double folded waistband with elastic in the middle, kind of sandwiched between, and then knit the waistband together around the elastic. And I then did some increases for the hips, kind of just until the, oh, there's a name for that in sewing, and I can't remember what it is. But the widest part of your hip, which is not your hip, I'm going to Google it. I'm sure I'll kick myself when I find out what it is. Anyway, and then essentially worked down straight until it was the length that I needed, or in my case, I just used up all of the yarn that I had because I didn't need it for anything else, and that was quite satisfying. And then finished it off with a folded hem, and I did a purl bump at the point where the hem folds just to keep it really nice and sharp, and I felt like that worked really well actually. The extra weight on the hem means that it hangs really nicely, but again, because of the yarn and because of the cotton, it does have a bit of a tendency to sort of flare out a little bit. So that's something else that I've been sort of thinking that, there might be a quick fix for. It's not bad enough that it bothers me at the minute, but I feel like if I were to do it again or if I were to use that technique in a different garment, I might think about it in that case. And in case anyone's interested, not that it's a pattern, so it's necessarily helpful, but this was knit on what size needles? 3.5mm needles with double knit yarn, and it used about 700, 750 meters. So if anyone's looking for a good estimate, if they've got some cotton to use up, it's nice because you get a full garment and it doesn't use as much as a jumper. So that's a win in my book. And the second project that I had on the go is something that I finished very recently, basically last week. And it only took me 2 days, which was really nice after spending such a long time slaving away on the other projects. But this is the Orbit Hat by Rose Knitwear, which is actually a pattern that I've been loving recently. And the only reason that I made it was just because I had this gorgeous Icelandic yarn that was left over, and it was a bit of a shame for it to not have a home. So I've ended up with a blue and green Orbit hat. And I will say, as great as the pattern is, it took me a few goes. And I'm not one who necessarily has trouble reading patterns, but I do feel like the instructions were sort of lacking in some way, which was a bit disappointing. As soon as I'd kind of got my head around the construction of the stitch, because it is quite interesting in that it's cabled, but it has these almost slip stitches that are sort of pulled across each row. And it was a little bit confusing just from reading the written instructions to work that out. I feel like it would have been helpful if there had been a note in the instructions which pointed out which way to approach the knit stitches, either from the front or the back of the work, which I have seen in other patterns. And I felt like as soon as I realised that I was approaching it from the wrong direction, it all kind of clicked into place and the pattern started turning out right. And so it did take me 3 goes at starting it before I got the hang of the stitch pattern. But after that, it was a breeze, so I can't really complain. In terms of a really speedy beanie project, I cannot fault it at all. I've also worn it a couple of times because we've had a bit of a storm over the last couple of days and it's been quite windy. So it's been incredibly warm, which I knew it was going to be. But I think because it is just such a chunky fabric, it's going to be brilliant in the colder weather. And I would say that it's the kind of thing I think you could make it work even if you don't have chunky yarn to use up. Because I feel like 2 strands of Aran held together, or even if you had scraps and you could kind of just cluster them together to get the right weight, I think it would look really cool. And if anyone's looking for a bit of a twist on a beanie, if you're bored of knitting hats, which I know I am, then I'd absolutely recommend it. I would just say it's worth reading the comments on other people's Ravelry projects, which points out kind of some of the difficulties with the stitch, which can be a little bit tricky to get hold of. But I will say once it clicks into place, it works up really quickly and it's definitely very satisfying knit. So I heartily recommend. I'm kneeling on the floor and my feet are already going numb. So maybe this is not a long-term solution like I thought it might be. I'm going to have to brace myself to talk about the next project because I'm very disappointed in myself and my mathematical abilities. But I have a Ringo top, which is actually finished, even though it looks like it's not, because I'm still casting it off. And it is ever so cute. It's beautiful. It's with a hand-dyed kind of sparkly yarn. I don't know how well the sparkles are going to show up on camera. And it's basically cabled at the top and then 2x2 rib at the bottom. I lost yarn chicken. Of course I lost yarn chicken. I bought one skein of sock yarn and thought I could make a whole top. That wasn't going to happen. I also didn't have the right needles for the pattern. I don't know why I do this to myself. I should invest more in equipment and also swatching to make sure that I get the right gauge, because I read the pattern, I saw that it needed 2.75 or 3mm needles. I looked at my needles, I thought, smallest needles I've got are 3.5. It'll do. It wouldn't do. It didn't do. I thought I'd done some maths to try and scale up the gauge and size the pattern down to the point where it might fit me. It doesn't work like that. It didn't fit me. It's slightly too small. Luckily, I think it's still going to go to a good home because my housemate has said that she's quite excited about it. So that gives me a bit of solace, but I am really disappointed that it doesn't fit. And it essentially was quite tedious, but it was also my first time knitting cables, so that's only to be expected. And I will say that the finished article is beautiful. And I feel like the pattern was also really well explained, especially for someone who hasn't dealt with cables before, and was very straightforward. I did make a few changes. So the pattern basically has I-cord cast-offs on the armholes and the neck, which are brilliant, but they do mean that they add a lot of tension because you don't get a lot of stretch with an I-cord. And I feel like that is where the problem lies, in that the top fits me, but the armholes are just too tight because of the nature of the I-cord not having any elasticity. So that's what's disappointed me. I also didn't have enough yarn to make it as long as it needed to be, so it is very cropped. And that, combined with the fact that it's already a little bit small, it's not flattering. Like, no one wants to see that. So I thought it was safer if I passed it down to someone who it would be a better fit for. And all that I'm doing at the minute, I'd realised that when I cast it off, there just wasn't enough stretch in the bind off to wear it comfortably. So essentially, that's the only reason that it's still got a needle in it. And I'm working my way through with a sewn bind off at the moment. I feel like in the summer, I'm going to let myself have another go at it because I would really love to own something made from this pattern. And I feel like I would get a lot of wear out of it. But I think in the spring, with the correct quantity of yarn and at the right gauge, I'll just make something that fits me better. And at least I know that this is going to go to a good home where it will be appreciated. I also did start at the cable section with a provisional cast on, and I'm quite glad that I did because it meant that I can properly adjust the length because it is worked bottom up. So I think if you're a bit conscious about the length of your tops being how you like them and you like to try things on along the way, I'd definitely recommend starting partway up with a provisional cast on, which is very easy to do from the way that the pattern's designed, and then going back and working the rib section from the top down, which is what I did with this one, mainly because I obviously didn't know how much yarn I was going to have left, and it's not enough. Hey ho. So yeah, slightly disappointing, but very glad to have it off the needles, and I still think it's really cute, and I think that the pattern is fantastic, and it was a great first experience at doing cables, and it wasn't enough to put me off, so I think that's a good sign. So at the moment, I have 3 whips on the go. One of them is extremely exciting, and that is the Zachary cardigan, which I finally cast on after months and months of owning this yarn and itching to actually cast it on. My willpower held out and it was totally worth it because now I'm really enjoying working on this. And it's also being run up very, very quickly, partially because it's a raglan, which is my favourite construction. It is a cardigan and it's knit flat, so it loses points there, but you know, it's not enough to put me off it. Also, I'm using some very exciting yarn, which is Rauma Finial, and it's the first time I've ever used it, and I will say I'm already a huge fan. I bought this when it was actually, I can't remember if it was on sale or it was just the last of the stock that the online shop I use has, because I do find that Rauma and lots of like Norwegian and Scandi yarns are not that easy to procure close to me. So I did have to buy it online, and the shop had the exact quantity that I needed for this project in stock at the time. So I was a bit preemptive and a bit keen, but it definitely paid off because it means that I was ready to dive straight into it whenever I finished my summer projects. And I think at the minute, I really can't say a lot about the pattern. It's very easy to follow. It's nice that it gives you options for how you want to finish the button band, which I think is a great consideration because they do make a note of saying that certain yarns don't necessarily provide a really neat look with the instructions that they have for the button band, and so they give you the option of doing an I-cord edge, which I'm not doing. I'm doing the first option, which is the pattern option. But I think it's nice that you get the choice and you don't have to make that substitution yourself. So it's brilliant. I think it'll be interesting for me because the cardigans that I've made in the past have always had knitted buttonholes, whereas this has afterthought buttonholes. So it'll be interesting to see how they turn out, but I'm not going to do any of the buttonholes or buttons until I've finished the actual cardigan because I can't be dealing with the stress. So for the meanwhile, I'm basically almost finished on the increases for the yoke, and I think in a couple of rows I'll have enough to be able to split for the sleeves. So it's really working up extremely speedily. This is only about a week's work, which it doesn't look like a lot for a week, but there are also a lot of stitches going on here. So the rows are taking me quite a while. Now I'm getting to the widest part. But again, I just feel like it's a lovely, warm, wintry cardigan. I'm very excited to be wearing it. And I'm really enjoying the yarn so far. I feel like I can only properly review a yarn once I've worn it a few times and seen how it goes. But as it is at the moment, I would say that it's medium rustic and probably quite similar to some Shetland yarns, if anybody's used any of those. But I think it would be a little bit softer than the Shetland yarns that I've seen, like Jameson and Smith, Jamesons of Shetland type things. Possibly. I'll have to think about that. I'm not particularly sensitive about yarn, and I also really like the finish of a more rustic yarn, so it's right up my street. But I realise it's not for everyone. I will say though that the cardigan pattern so far looks to be really flattering, and it's also very well written and gives some nice, you know, design options and considerations for the different yarns that people might be using. So I really appreciate that from the designer. I'm sure by the next time I get to a podcast update, there'll be a lot more of this to talk about. So I'll chat about it then. Now, the next cast on, I'm really switching things up. And I actually have a little crochet project for you, which is not like me. This is a once in a blue moon opportunity because I'm not a crocheter and I don't claim to be. And I think I struggle to make crochet look nice, which is part of the reason that I avoid it at all costs. But again, in the vein of using up some of my larger stash items before the winter, I realised that I have quite a few balls of this Drops Nepal left, and also about 300 grams of Noro Ito, which was left over from my step-by-step sweater, which I made earlier in the year. And I've decided to make a cushion because I have made one cushion before in knit, but I haven't crocheted one. And I will say that although I don't have a pattern for the top, this stitch pattern is inspired by the block top by Rose Knitwear. And it was very much just interpreted by me looking at the pattern photos and seeing if I could work out what the stitches are. And I feel like it's right, but also it might not be, and that's fine because it looks good to me the way that it is. But essentially, It's just going to be zigzags of these two colours. I'm going to see how much yarn I have to use and possibly make it a square or a rectangular cushion, depending on how much I have to use up. But I am thinking that I'll probably go to Petite Knit and buy one of the zipped cushion backs to use as the back piece because I definitely know that I don't have enough yarn to do both sides. So I'd rather make the front to the dimensions that I want that will fit a regular cushion insert and then buy a canvas zippy back to go on it and possibly do some Frankensteining of those to get them together to create a cushion. But that's very exciting. It's been a while since I've been excited to reach for crochet, but I feel like it just works up so quickly that at the moment it's really satisfying. And also, because this is Aran weight, and I think I'm using a 5mm hook, the fabric is just really nice and thick and chunky. And yeah, I'm excited to see how it progresses. I feel like working with gradient yarns is just so exciting because you never know what colour you're going to get until you get there. And last but not least, I will say that this last whip has been a bit neglected recently, mainly because I've just been so excited to work on other things that haven't really reached for it. But to keep you in the loop, it's very much still on the go. This is the Mitsoni sweater by Lindsay Deegan. Holding it up like this, I realise that this panel looks extremely wide. That's a bit of a worry. Oh my God. I hadn't even noticed that before. Okay. Well, I might have to think about this. Yeah, that is quite wide, isn't it? Right. I think we'll do some more maths and see how this is working out. I'm pretty sure the gauge is right. I think I did measure it. Anyway, sidetracked. This is still very much on the go. And I do have a pretty good bag of double knit scraps that I'm working through and adding to bit by bit. I think it's one of those whips where I'll get round to it as soon as I've finished all of my exciting new projects. And sometimes I am just in the mood for something scrappy and it really fills that void. So I'm glad to keep it on the go, but I'm in no rush to finish it because I'm fairly sure, as it stands at the minute, I don't actually have enough double knit to make the full garment. So I know that I'm going to have to finish a few more other things in the meanwhile to add to my supplies. Kind of interested to see what people do when they get ends like this in a garment because I don't know if I could be bothered weaving all of those in. They're a little bit intimidating. If anyone's ever made something similar, a stripy, scrappy jumper or what have you, please tell me how you dealt with all the ends. Or did you just go through the pain of weaving them in one by one, which I'm sure would be worth it, but does sound like it would take quite a while. At least I've probably got a long time before I'm anywhere close to finishing this to think about that. So that's reassuring. And I know I said I wasn't going to talk about acquisitions, and this is definitely not an acquisition, but I will say that whenever I finish my next FO, the plan is to immediately cast on the Knitting for Olive Madeline sweater, which I've been excited about for months. And for it, I've got this apparently I can't speak, this West Yorkshire Spinners Croft Aran, which was frogged from a previous jumper that I had made. And I know that I don't have enough. I've only got about 700, 800 grams. So I'm going to have to buy a bit more. I know it's going to be a different dye lot. It's cream. Is it going to be that bad? Possibly. I'm sort of debating whether it's worth ordering the yarn before I cast it on, doing a bit of helical knitting to try and blend in the new colour scheme, or just winging it, waiting to see how far this gets me, and then changing to the new dye lot whenever I have to buy new yarn. Because it is a lace pattern, so I'm sort of doubtful about how obvious it's going to be. Give me your opinions, please, because I'm indecisive and lazy, and if it's up to me, I'll just work it out and then buy new yarn and realise that the dye lot's entirely different, and then be very annoyed that I've spent so long making a project and it annoys me every time I look at a stripe on it. But yeah, this is just such a great yarn. It'd be a shame for it to go to waste. And I do have, I don't know how many hanks of this, about 6 or 7 in this bag to get me started. I'll also not be knitting that pattern to gauge because it is written for a double knit and this is a very true Aran. It's not even really a worsted. So I feel like I'm definitely going to have to do a little bit of maths for it to work with the new yarn and possibly size up the needles by, you know, a millimetre or whatever. I will have learnt from the Ringo top to possibly knit some swatches and check that it works and really make sure that my maths is mathsing so that I end up with something that doesn't drown me because I feel like that could happen very, very easily. But yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to work on some lace. I've not done that for a very long time. But priority for now is definitely the Zachary cardigan. And then possibly we'll move on to that one. But we'll see. I'm sure I will come up with something inventive in the meantime, like my cushion or my hat or a little accessory project maybe for a change of scene. But hey ho, we'll see how it goes. Thank you so much for listening. I hope everyone has a lovely week planned. Tell me if this location is better than the one from the last video, even though I have been sat here for about 40 minutes and I don't know if I'll be able to stand up because my calves and feet are entirely dead. Oh well, okay. I won't keep you. Happy crafting.